Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all to the 7th plenary session on academic leadership, the technology factor. Our chairperson for the session is Professor Arun Pereira. He is the Executive Director, Center for Teaching, Learning and Case Development, ISB, Hyderabad. I would like to request Professor Mona Sinha to please felicitate Professor Arun Pereira. Thank you. We have as our speakers Professor Darren Master and Professor Galit Shumli. I request our Honorable Director Dr. D.Y. Patil to felicitate both our speakers. Thank you, sir. Now I would like to hand over the entire session to our chairperson, Professor Pereira. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Arun Pereira. Very happy to be here. Our session is called Academic Leadership, the Technology Factor. I'm a faculty at ISB, and with me are two distinguished panelists. I have Darren Meister, Professor Darren Meister, and Professor Galit Shmuli, and both are associate professors in the information systems area in Western University for Darren, and Galit is at ISB. Hopefully we'll have a productive session here today, and to the extent possible we'll try to draw you into our discussion. I think it's an interesting topic we're talking about, very relevant and timely one. And let me sort of put some structure and focus to the topic. So when we say academic leadership, the technology factor, let me sort of define academic as business schools and executive education in business. We talk about leadership, let me sort of define it as simply the power to influence. So, the top leaders or institutions in business schools should be driving change, and the ability to influence other business schools. And let's see how technology can play a role in enabling that. And let me add a little bit more structure with regard to technology. So technology, I'll define technology as technology for what I call as reach, and technology to teach. So technology for reach talks about new markets, new developments, so massive open into these days. An example of one would be Coursera, Coursera that came out of Stanford. These are massive open online courses available for free right now to most of the world, and right now Coursera has got 328 courses. About 62 universities across 17 countries are part of Coursera. 2.8 million students in 200 countries are actually taking these courses. Now, is this a model that's sustainable over time? That's the question that I think we all need to think about, and whether it's going to affect us as students, as teachers, as administrators. So MOOCs are one way technology actually enables reach new markets and new customers. We can think of technology in terms of improving learning in the classroom. I think increasingly we talk about moving away from what's called a method with students sitting in neatly arranged chairs and tables. I don't think that is the most optimal way that learning takes place. Right? Learning takes place when there is interaction, involvement, discussion, and debate. So we are looking at technology that can help, improve learning in the classroom. And one way that we do this is so-called interactive technology in the classroom, and through that, this notion of what's called the flipped classroom. If you've heard of the flipped classroom, what it says is that, look, if you're doing anything that deals with passive learning, where you're simply lecturing, today we can take it outside the classroom in the form of a webcast. It can be on YouTube, it can be on any number of platforms. And any type of group interactive work can be brought into the classroom. So this is the flip. The lecture goes outside, and homework-like activities and assignments come inside the classroom, and we know it works very effectively. The data are very, very compelling. Student engagement in learning is twice as much as normal. Test scores increase, attendance increases. So overall, it's a powerful model for teaching and learning, this notion of a flipped classroom. So what I'll do now for this panel discussion is to first ask each panelist to give their remarks and hopefully define along these two broad lines of technology, for reach and technology to teach. And with that in mind, let me first start with Galit. She'll have a few words to say about this. Then we'll have Darren, and then we will start our discussion and hopefully draw you into our discussion too. Galit?
This is on. Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you very much, Arun, for inviting me to the panel. Thank you to the AAMIS for inviting me. You can put on the slide. So what I want to tell you today about, in very brief, just take, sorry, it's on the is actually about, I'm going to start from an experience that I had, which is taking a course that existed in traditional form and transforming it. And I think you can see my slides on that side. I called my few minutes here flipping and smooking. You'll notice there's an S before the MOOC, and I'll explain that soon. And the reason that I'd like to describe very briefly this experience is because I believe very much in the words of the Buddha. If you don't experience yourself, you'll never know what it's like. So when we're telling you about these things, unless you try them for yourself, you really won't get a feel of what's happening. So let me tell you a little bit about a course. This is a course that has been offered at the Indian School of Business for a few years. It's called Business Analytics Using Data Mining. It has technical components, but it also has a very close tie with business. So the idea is to solve a real business problem by using data analytic tools, data mining algorithms in particular. So the objectives of this course is to integrate a business problem with data analytic methods. And that is a very difficult thing to do. The translation between a business problem and a data challenge is difficult, and that's what we try and achieve as one of the course objectives in this course. It's a very hands-on course. The students work in teams on real projects with real data, and they have to come up with solutions that would make sense. And also, what you want to achieve in a course like this is that they will be familiar with different types of applications in industry where data mining is used or can be used. So you want their mind to be very open, but to also have some examples of where it's being used and how it's being used. And lastly, being business students and not being the data crunchers themselves, you want your students to learn and know what they don't know. So they shouldn't think they are the all-powerful people who can go and do the whole project on their own and they can do this component and that component. They need to know where their limitations are. So these are the objectives of this course. As I said, traditionally, this course was offered as a lecture type of course with a team project component that runs throughout the entire term. And there are homeworks and all the usual different components. There are no tests in this type of course. What I did in trying to achieve these objectives better was to use technology in the following way. And this is why I called it flipping and smooking. And you'll see that in this new way that I designed, I did not have Arun's very nice slogan of technology for teaching or to teach and technology for reach, but you'll see that it very, very naturally emerges in lots of interesting directions. So in terms of the course, there were 3 parts. One was what the students have to do before they actually walk into class. So you're still meeting them on a usual basis. What they had to do was watch a video or a few videos, short videos. They had to read in a textbook or some kind of reading assignment. And they had to start responding to an online discussion forum. So when they come to class, they already have the mindset and the initial tools of what we're going to be starting to do in class. This means that in class, I don't need to lecture because they already watched the lecture in video form and they read about the material in the textbook. Also, the online discussion starts navigating them in the direction of where we're trying to go. The next part is when they come to class. So when they come to class, there's no more lecture at the top and people taking notes or listening at the other end, but instead you have a very lively discussion that picks up from the online discussion. That's number 1. Number 2, when everybody's already read and listened and thoughts are already in their head, there are a lot of questions, higher level questions that come up. So the discussion is very, very organic, very easy, and people have lots of questions and interesting questions. These are not necessarily small technical understanding questions at this point. What you end up doing in class, besides the discussions, is you start doing big assignments that might be a little intimidating if you just send them off to do it on their own. And you sit in class, and my students bring their laptops in many of the sessions, and we start going through some of these assignments, and then they take them back out. And they're not going to complete them during class. We're just giving them the level of the comfort level and the questioning part that usually happens that is very useful. That happens in class. You can also use class time for some guest lectures, but we do that very, very sparingly, only if it's really necessary and it adds value. The other thing that we do face-to-face, which the flipping allows you to do better, is I meet with each one of these teams throughout the term. And when they're working on their project, the biggest learning is when they hit different walls and they're not sure what to do. So the ability to come and talk to you and you give them feedback and you're in this face-to-face loop is very, very useful, and it also helps with the online component. Last component is, again, in class, we're using this active learning approach where many times I use what's called clickers. These are these questions, these polls that you run in class where students are answering, and you can see what everybody is saying at the same time. And many times I'm not using this to give them grades or to rank whether they got it or they didn't get it, but more really to open up a discussion and to see what they learned. Finally, third piece, after they leave class, they have to go back and work on their individual assignments, which we started in class, and that's also where the big, heavy team project takes place. So this new setup, where the sequence of what they do is in this form, is very different from the previous way this was taught. So what does this actually mean? First of all, if we're thinking about the technology, I didn't use one of these MOOCs that are, the edX or the Coursera. I didn't use any of those platforms. Instead, I built my own platform, which was free, using Google components, basically, which means that you don't really need a very high-end type of knowledge or a very high-end, expensive IT team in order to run such a program. You need to be motivated about it. But the question was not so much what tool I'm using, it was how I'm using it. Because if you're thinking about using technology in the classroom, it's all about transferring knowledge or skills, developing skills. And we can think about very old technologies such as writing on the blackboard, or then came the overhead projectors, or then came the PowerPoint, right, which is also known as death by PowerPoint, where people just watch and have no idea what's really important. So all the technologies have been evolving, and you can use them in a very one-way type of knowledge transfer approach. Or you could have used all of these technologies in a much more active way. You could have used the Blackboard to call people up to the board and have discussions and use them in an active way. You could have used overheads to solve problems with your class together, right, and go through the task together. There's so many ways that these technologies have been used by a very small leadership in management to use them in an active way. So it's not so much about the technology, It's more about how you use the technology and how you're engaging the students from the other end. Of course, the new technologies make it more easy for instructors to be independent and go and try out these experiences on their own. It's easier if the university or the school is doing it, but you can try a lot of things on your own. You can flip and you can MOOC basically on your own. Now, you've noticed the little X before the MOOC, and remember MOOC is Massive Online Open Course. Open, meaning open to the world. What I did was not open, but semi-open, and that's the S. So it's a semi-MOOC. And what we did there in particular was we opened this course to the entire ISB community. Anyone who had an ISB email address, means hundreds of alumni, faculty, visiting faculty, staff, which means all our research assistants and our teaching assistants, students who were not registered for this course. There was a large community of people who had free access to the online component of the course, not the on-ground component. And what this meant was reach. We were able to reach our alumni. There were many alumni who took the course. We had a few hundred. And they really loved it because it was their opportunity, first of all, to come back to ISB if you want. Number two, to upgrade their skills. Number three, to find all kinds of interesting relationships on this, in this context with ISB, so they keep in touch with you afterwards. And they go and promote it to other people in their companies who might later on want to come to ISB. So you've created some more interested partners. We've also partnered with some industry, so a few people in industry actually were there. A few analysts were there behind the scenes also taking the online component. And just notice that in the online component we had the discussion forum and actually a contest. And all these people interacted there. So that added a lot of value to our students who were interacting with industry and with alumni who were more experienced than them. And it also added to the other side to see how smart our students are and what they're able to do. So that was a lot about the reach. So improving the teaching is one. The other is extending the reach. And by keeping it closed within our community, we still didn't make everything publicly available. It's a good question whether that's a good next step or not a good next step. But as I said, sometimes you just have to experiment and learn the lessons. As I said, you know, the new technology is important. In other courses that I teach, even if they're still in the traditional form, I have slowly started migrating into flipping or building an activity basis. And I think that's a good first step for those of you who just do lecture mode. For example, for every course that I teach, I open a Facebook group. I never did Facebook before I started teaching in these classes. You open a closed Facebook group and you won't believe your students are there 24 hours. So that's the place to engage them to start with. And then you can get a lot more ambitious and start recording videos. Now, some people just record their classes. They have a camera like here, and then they'll just put the recording online. That's a first step, but that's not where the state of technology is right now. Right now, it's more about recording, especially for these video small sessions, where you actually sit in front of the camera and you're talking to the people who are on the other side. That's different from just taking a video of a lecture and just putting a 1 hour online. It's very different. And if you want to see some examples there, you can go ahead. I left a few of my modules open to the entire public. And lastly, I'll mention again that there are platforms today, technology platforms such as Kaggle.com or Crowd Analytics that allow you to do contests that are open to the entire universe. By subjecting your students and forcing them to go there and compete with other experts, you actually get a lot of this. They learn what they don't know. They learn what other people do know. They can assess how well they're doing. And it's very engaging and very, very fun. So the key is really to have fun. My final slide and my final message to you is that really the experience is the learning. You can use as much technology as you want, but if you don't make it the experience, that's what people will remember, that's what people will take with them, and that's what will make them excited. So the issue of tackling challenges. You throw challenges at them that they're not very easy and maybe they can't solve on their own. Once you start tackling a challenge, that's where you can bring the technology to help you and to help them. Communication, solving. Then another very useful thing that we do with technology today is try and mimic the real situations where they're going to have to tackle those challenges. When they go and work in a big company and they're going to have to try and run a data analytics type of project, how can I make my classroom as similar to that type of experience? You bring in the industry, right? Don't let them come and give guest lectures, but instead have them play with them, have them talk with them, use their data. So we're trying to mimic that real-life situation as much as possible. The other thing we can do with technology today is give immediate feedback. So even if you have a class of 60 or 2 classes of 60 or whatever it is, this scalability is the ability to build in self-assessments. That's one. You use the online forums so that people give feedback to each other, which is also scalable and pretty useful. And it's very constructive. People love to sort of see other people responding to them online, right? Think about Facebook. And finally, it's very rewarding. It's rewarding for the students. It's actually very rewarding for the faculty, because you actually get engaged in much more interesting types of teaching. It's not the same old thing that you're teaching again and again. You move to different levels, you get different questions, you can really get to people's brains at a higher level than just the very technical type of interactions. Lastly, and this is a key word, it has to be fun. So educational is a necessity, it has to be useful. If it's not useful and just fun, it's useless, but it has to be fun. And technology adds a huge layer of fun. The people who are growing up today, without technology, they're not interested. So building in all those opportunities makes really for this Teach for Reach. You're reaching a new type of population of students, reaching beyond the students, reaching to your own alumni, reaching to your own faculty, improving the skills of the teaching assistants who can actually learn in this way, and making it fun for everybody. I'll also just mention one small thing about neurology of the brain, and there's now more and more research coming out of this field of neurology of learning. These cognitive psychologists and neurologists are looking at how our brain is functioning while we're learning in different ways. And these new technological advances, some of them are good and some of them are bad, in the sense that if we use them just off the shelf, we might be improving learning or we might be harming learning. So a lot of the information that's coming out of this neurological science is giving us some good practices of how to use the technology in a way that actually makes things last longer, go deeper, and actually give us a good experience of what we've just learned. So bottom line, you use the technology to make it more engaging, more active. You want the students tackling challenges and doing things on their own. You want to give quick feedback, because that's really essential. And finally, you want it to be a very, very useful type of experience. So I think with that, that's how I've attacked this subject.
Good morning. What I want to talk a little bit about is some of the stuff that we've been, again, like ISB, been doing at opportunities, and hopefully trigger some thinking for you about what you can develop in the next couple of years. I want to very specifically talk about a couple of things, and one of which, of course, is the hot topic du jour, of course, and everything right now with education. People are trying to figure out, is this idea of MOOCs. I don't see a world in which MOOCs don't continue to grow in presence. I think they are obviously something that a lot of schools are going to experiment with. Whether or not they're there in 5 years from now in the same form that they are today, I don't know. I would expect them not to be. I would hope that as a thriving academic community, we would learn a lot about how to deliver them, that MOOC 1.0 is not going to be MOOC 2.0, MOOC 3.0. So I assume they're going to change, but I assume also by not participating in them, you'll forfeit the opportunity to develop those in a way that makes sense. So I do think there's a role for people to get involved in trying out what these look like. Be they be a SMOOC. I personally love the idea of bringing alumni into them and having that interaction with students. You know, certainly one of the things, again, I've heard throughout this conference is getting students more interaction with people in industry, getting faculty more interaction with people in industry. Isn't it really the easiest way to get more interaction with industry if you're able to do it at the same time as you're teaching? It's hard to take 2 separate days. If you combine those into one day, you're much better off. But one of the places I really wanted to stress is, and there's a huge opportunity to collaborate. Ivy is part of an organization called SEMS. SEMS is an international organization that delivers a Master of International Management program. Our partner in India is IIM Calcutta in that. We're also partners with London School of Economics, HEC Paris, Society, schools around the world, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, and US. And what we're starting to try and do is we have some elements of that curriculum that are shared amongst all of the schools. So one of the things that we're sort of saying is, why don't we start developing MOOCs or mini MOOCs, rather than MOOCs, we're into the world of mini MOOCs, of smaller lectures that we can share amongst the schools. Because our students are moving amongst all of these schools, why don't we have faculty ideas move amongst the schools? So rather than me just doing a lecture on what does technology adoption mean in Canada, or a discussion, and putting that up, why not have 5 of my colleagues from around the world, all of us do 10 minutes, and then have the students have a snapshot from these things? I think there's a huge opportunity for schools in India or any countries to collaborate and share on those, and to have an opportunity to have the input on that. But what, in my estimation so far of what I've seen of MOOCs, they're not good at sharing content. And maybe it's, they're good at sharing content. They're not good at sharing context. And maybe this is as a case teacher. You may have heard Ivy's a school that really values case teaching. But one of the elements of it is facts help us flip that classroom. Rather than me having to have a mini lecture, I can have the students read something or see something somewhere else. In addition to their love for Facebook, they love video input way more than they love written input. So go watch a video for 15 minutes. What do I care if they read or watch to get that information? But when I look at it, it's they're saying there's a real opportunity of us then putting into that context. And I don't care what market your school caters to. If you're a local business school working in a more rural environment, your job of contextualizing a MOOC is just as important, if not more important, than mine. Because regardless of what information is being presented factually, it needs to be put into a context for a student to be able to apply it. As I say, it's a great support for case teaching. It may seem strange, but I assign almost a Wikipedia reading every day in my case teaching classes. I also tell the students, I expect you to fix Wikipedia articles if you find a mistake with them. And it's a great way of adding back to the community that way. But we can look at some of those issues. But I want to, for me, one of the original MOOCs was YouTube. I always am using videos from other parts of the world. They're just not an 80-minute lecture. They're not an entire course. But they're that little element of it. I use old videos. There's some great videos when you're in the technology field that people from the 1960s recorded on BBC to sort of say, this is where we think technology will be 50 years from now. It's wonderful to pull those out and see that they're about 50% accurate. Which I actually think if anything I say today will be 50% accurate 50 years from now, I'll be pretty proud of myself. But they're interesting to watch to help students put that context around things. And TED Talks, I love because they've got lots of opinionated people who disagree with me and spur lots of thinking for the students by bringing those in. So I build my MOOC virtually from resources around the world. Now I want to talk a little bit about classroom technology. We have just built a new building. It is almost insanely over the top. It's a wonderful, beautiful building, and I hope that many of you have a chance to see it sometime. But there's a huge set of new technologies that are become available. My personal concern is, and when we were building our new building, I was part of the group that was able to say this, is too much technology will take us away from teaching. As faculty, we'll become worried about becoming infotainers rather than educators. So I don't think all technology is great. I want to sort of show you a little bit of what our new classroom looks like. We've moved into the world of the USS Enterprise and Star Trek. That is the control panel that runs the entire classroom. That's what the classroom looks like. Up in the top left-hand corner is a video camera. There's 2 projector screens. There's Wi-Fi. There's microphones throughout all of it. View from the other way. That's the front of the classroom. 2 large projector screens again. All sorts of really fun and funky stuff. Now, that classroom costs, when I translate it into rupees, 75 lakh. The technology only. I just sort of, the term I keep hearing over the last couple of days, "You God." This just sounds like an opportunity like no other. Because I don't know how many of you want to refit your classrooms for 75,000 lakh of opportunities. But man, can you do it cheaper. Learn from our mistakes of where we spent too much money. First, you don't need the control panel. Just hire slightly smarter faculty. Too many of our faculty, you have a button to do everything. The funny thing is, the class building has kind of been open for 2 years. We still haven't got the control panel working properly. Because it's so complicated. But there's a couple of things I think you really do think to need to build into the classroom of the future if you're really interested. And the first one's kind of funny. We've had it for a long time. But the thing that's circled there is a document camera landing area. The document camera is the best thing that we put into the classroom. Because I bring in newspaper articles to my class, put them at the front, and say, discuss how what we talked about in the last class would help you make a better decision. Don't photocopy, don't do things like that. Very simple. Don't scan, don't do anything like that. Very simple, walk in and add to it. Think how many easy ways you can do that cheaper than probably the $10,000 camera we're using to do that. One of my favorite tricks when the camera isn't working is I take my laptop, I turn the camera on, I turn it upside down, and I hold the piece of paper in front of it. And just do it that way. Another thing that we do is these 2 slides. And I'll show you how technology in 3 years since we've designed this part of the classroom has changed. So what you saw there was the presenter slides were one, and we would bring in a presenter by video conference. We don't bring presenters in by this expensive video conferencing system anymore. We bring them in by Skype. And you don't need 2 big slides at the front. You can have 2 television sets at the front. And then the students, you are able to use technology to both reach and teach at the same time by bringing in a speaker from some other part of the world to interact live with your class. Many people in business are happy to come in for an hour. My apologies to the Mumbai traffic, but it's sometimes hard to convince people to come because you have to spend 3 hours in traffic going anywhere. So video conferencing, boom, hour, I'm done. Those are the 2 features in this very expensive classroom we're using the most to bring reach into the classroom. So what I think is important to take away from lessons of that is that you need to focus on what serves the pedagogical purpose. We are a case-based school. We know that MOOCs will disrupt education if you are a lecture-based school. So we looked at them as an opportunity and said, what can we do with them and how can we use these more aggressively to help our students be better prepared for class? But you do have to imagine what the new technology do that the old one can't. Suddenly, case discussions, we can have an industry speaker whenever we feel like, not just whenever we can afford it. Our school is located 2 hours away from a major city. It's difficult to sometimes get people to come in. And finally, I just look at it and say technology is to continue to look at the cost, time, and distance that continues to break those boundaries down. Those are the things that restrict what information we can bring to our students. Technology is continuing to break those boundaries. So on that point in time, I'll turn the panel back to Arun.
So let me get a little bit of focus in our discussion. If you remember, the title of our panel is Academic Leadership, the Technology Factor. So we talked about breaking it up into reach and teach. My question, I guess, to the panelists, and maybe we can get some feedback from the audience too, is that today, if you look at reach, and MOOCs are the obvious method for reach, we have 2 types of entities that do these MOOCs. You have private companies, like Coursera, then you have actual institutions, like the Harvard Business School, who are actually putting out MOOCs. I guess my question first to the panelists is that how do you see these MOOCs evolving? The business school MOOCs that are evolving separately? Are these private companies moving separately? There is some interaction between them. You get the private companies using the universities. As you look forward, I think there will be either one or two models that will ultimately, be sustainable. So right now, financially, they're not very sustainable either. So let me start with Galit first. What is your view on how MOOCs will evolve in terms of where they are sourced from and what they will look like as you go forward?
Okay. I think that, first of all, okay. Yeah, can you hear? Okay, yeah, this one's better. So I think, first of all, you want to think about what the MOOCs give you, and I agree very much with Darren's point about context that is missing. I think that, first of all, MOOCs are very good at content, at least at giving you a flavor of what the content is about. It's almost like reading the back of the book, the cover, and seeing, oh, this book is about that, let's read it, or let's not read it. So I think the MOOCs are going to at least lead to people making more informed decisions about what areas in the university they're going to. If they want to go into business, let them see what a business school course looks like. Maybe it's not really something that they want to do. So that's first of all. And I think that's a good thing. And the more MOOCs we have in different areas, we'll get people who are more intelligent about what they're going to learn. They'll make better decisions. In terms of what the MOOCs are going to offer, I think the business school is one of the extreme cases where a really good business school that gives you the context and gives you the skills and gives you the ability to be effective afterwards, I don't think the MOOCs are going to give you that ability. Maybe in computer science, this is a little easier because it's more about content and mastering, and you can find out whether the program is running after you learned how to program it or not. Technical skills might be easier, but in the business school, that is not what we're doing. And therefore, I think that the MOOCs that will develop in this way or the other might be some resource that we will keep using in the business school and in our classes. We might take videos, we might take simulations that people create, we might use contests that are there, but we'll still need to do a lot of on-ground, face-to-face, working with teams in the business school. And that's what's going to differentiate the good business schools, just like today, from the ones who just lecture and the people leave and really don't have much left. In terms of the business side of it versus the university side of it, that's a really good riddle. I'm not sure. In many ways, MOOCs remind me a little bit of textbooks. Because today people are watching videos. Before they used to read textbooks. So is it just a different medium of how things are coming through? So are we giving them free textbooks when we're showing MOOCs, and then that's going to turn into a publisher model where someone's going to make money over it? Or is this really going to remain free and online? I don't know. I think from the perspective of us educators, the better question for me is, what am I going to do with all the stuff that's coming out of the MOOCs, and how do we take advantage and avoid all the pitfalls there?
Darren?
I think focusing first maybe on the latter question, because as a school, if you started to use a MOOC to support your education, one, there's the world of MOOCs as a straight competitor. And I think that one can be very concerning in a lot of circumstances to schools. As far as which MOOCs in the business model will continue, I think we'll have to look at two areas that have some sustainability. Some MOOCs that are targeting corporate universities, because corporations that are global corporations are different than a university because they're not at one location. So a MOOC that supports, let's take a Deloitte, global learning practices, is more a natural fit for Deloitte, and it becomes part of their doing business. So that MOOC can stay in business in delivering its content. For a university, we always will bring students to a single location. So the online part doesn't always work with our metric. I think the other part is there will always be universities that provide MOOCs because outreach is part of its mission. If you look at the state of California in the U.S., the state government there has very much made outreach an important part of its mission and increasing part of its mandate. So I think there will be continued philanthropic MOOCs that are out there. So I think that's probably the two places. I think they'll be out there. I think like any new industry, we'll see several fail. And like any good management practice and leadership practice, what happens if your MOOC disappears? How are you going to support it? But I also really wanted to say, I fully agree. Business schools are probably more immune to being replaced by MOOCs than very technical fields. So the more technically you teach, the greater risk to your institution of MOOCs.
So it looks like, I mean, what both of you are saying is that maybe the issue is not that MOOCs are going to disrupt business schools as such, but maybe the publishing industry, for example, they could get disrupted, textbooks being replaced by MOOCs, right? That's very possible. That I don't now ask my students to read a chapter, but to listen to a MOOC from another university or another professor. So in some ways, publishers could be threatened by the increasing number of MOOCs out there. And to your point, Darren, I guess you are saying that it could actually affect corporate training, executive training more so. So executive teaching and training could be impacted more than the traditional MBA type programs. So in some ways we're saying MOOCs are very relevant for business schools, but maybe we're asking the wrong question, that are they going to threaten business schools, but rather they're going to supplement and sort of complement the branding that goes for business schools in terms of outreach to areas that they don't normally reach to. But the industries that are threatened may be not these schools themselves, but rather publishers and exec training programs.
I mean, one thing that has sort of held constant since about the early 60s is when some of this research was done, was people as adults, once you're past the age 18, do education for three main reasons. There's many studies that have made these more fine, but three main reasons are, one is just to gain more knowledge because you have an orientation, you want to learn more. A second one is you need the credibility of that technology, of that education to get a job. So you need to be certified as an accountant, or you need to be certified as this. And the third reason people do education, and it's quite common as people get older, is socialization. I actually just want to go meet more people, and I do the education in those three ways. I think when what education you offer is focused on certifying people, that is the area that is most at risk from being disrupted by a MOOC. For the one where people want to learn, they actually want to hear other people's opinions. And people who want to socialize, obviously the MOOC is a method of socialization, but nowhere near the same as coming together. So I think we have to look at why do people come to your form of education, and then assess what the risk from a MOOC is at that point in time.
I'd also like to add one more point about, again, the way we learn. And we're talking about adult education because we're talking about undergrads and up. But it's well known that people learn better when there are multiple modes of learning. In other words, when you see a problem set up in different contexts, when you hear it from different ways, and you tackle things from different approaches. It's like, I remember, teachers in mathematics used to say, if you can't solve it in more than one way, you didn't get it. It's the same thing. Our brain works in that way. We develop these neurons and the connections when we see things in different ways. And I think that because of that reason and other reasons, it has been shown that only online learning is not as effective as what they call blended learning or hybrid learning, where you have a combination. So of course the online learning has challenged the on-ground only type of model that we're all used to. So it shifted to online, but if you look at the number of programs today that do only online, it's really more the certification or getting the accreditation or getting the degree. But the people who really need to acquire a skill and learn what's going on, the best way to do that is through these hybrid skills. And again, if you look at the top MOOC delivering places, their own students who pay premium don't only watch the videos. There are ground meetings where the students come in and they might be doing other things. So I think the MOOC is one component that will come in and it will disrupt our way of teaching, but there's still a lot of value in a good instructor leading and moderating and pushing and challenging the students so that they really can learn.
So you're also saying then that the MOOCs can actually be a powerful cost-reducing mechanism for some schools where they don't need to now bring in new faculty. They could use a MOOC delivery for some expertise. Let's say an economist in Stanford or Harvard or Ivy or ISB, puts out a MOOC, and then you need to have just sort of a person to be in the classroom to drive a discussion around it. So in other words, you're replacing in some ways faculty, and therefore it can be a cost savings. Do you see that as an issue for many of the developing nations, that you can actually have less faculty and replace some of the classes with a MOOC and follow up with discussions only, or do you think that's an overreach for a MOOC? Khalid?
I guess it depends what kind of schools we're talking about. If you're talking about a technical school, then probably yes. If you're talking about a business school, I don't think this will reduce the amount of faculty that you need, but it means that your faculty needs to know how to teach in a very different way. You still need the faculty, you still need their expertise, but if you're using outside videos, for example, as guest lectures, then someone needs to drive the discussion in the context and to have the whole critical thing of what's going on in running projects on ground. So I don't think the business school faculty are at any danger if they are willing to adapt. But it definitely means that you require faculty to be trained in a very different way for purposes of teaching.
I think to answer that question, I tend to come back to the concept of why companies outsource anything. In some ways, this is universities outsourcing some of their information. And the two main reasons any company outsources is, one is for cost saving. So I would, again, argue if you're basically, the professor who has a short career span ahead of them is the professor who does not like to prepare for class, who likes to read out of the textbook and use the slides that the publisher presents them. If that's the type of professor you are, MOOCs are a huge threat. But I think the other place where there an opportunity is, the other reason for outsourcing is to get scarce skills. There are people who have insights that nobody else has. And I think that's the real opportunity for MOOCs. And that's why rather than having I guess I'm probably a fan of MOOLs rather than MOOCs, but massive online lectures, is to have that opportunity to say, I don't want the whole course by this person's perspective, but I want to bring that one person's perspective in at this point in time, because they're smarter than me. I think that's the other challenge for faculty, is to be able to be comfortable saying, I want you to go to listen to someone else talk about this, because they're actually better at this than I am. I think that's tough.
And I think I like the idea of what you mentioned, many mini MOOCs, in other words, have multiple perspectives of the same issue that is brought to the student, and then you can drive a discussion around it. It's going to be a much richer learning experience than simply you doing the talking or having, one professor's point of view being conveyed to the class. So I think in that sense, what you talked about makes a lot of sense. Let's put together, 3 or 4 multiple points of view. Let's sort of switch our discussion to the in-class active learning, which is what you're talking about, that even if you have a MOOC, you want someone to drive a discussion, and therefore the role of the teacher is now very different. So we've always talked about the fact that we are moved from the so-called sage on the stage to a guide on the side, where you are actually enabling discussions. Now that's a behavior change that most faculty are not ready for. I don't know, have you, Darren, I guess in Ivy it is less of an issue because you use a case driven curriculum. Therefore, there is active learning going on. But have you ever seen resistance or difficulty of moving from a pure lecture standpoint to a more of a discussion base, or is that not an issue for you at Ivy?
I think for us it's less of an issue because when we lecture, we feel guilty about it already. And certainly at times we supplement our case discussions with lectures. So I think it's less. Before I was at Ivy, I worked at another school that was much more lecture-based. And I think that is a natural resistance. And what people don't like is they don't like often giving up the control. And that really, so much of management comes down to a balance of trust and control. And I think as faculty, one place we continue to have to become more comfortable with is trusting our students. I mean, let's be realistic here. If we don't guide them or lead them through this information that's out there electronically, they will find it anyway. To say, if we don't use these resources, our students won't find them is foolish. Students will use these resources. It's our choice whether we're part of that conversation or not.
So what you're saying is that we are no more, as teachers, repositories of information, right? That is all gone. I mean, that is sort of the past model of a teacher as a source of information. Information is already out there. You cannot compete with Wikipedia or Google. Therefore, your role is very different now.
Sorry, you can't make them go away.
That's right.
Like,
So they're there,
yeah,
you like it or not.
Yeah, part of the reason why I assign Wikipedia readings is to make sure that I go look at what half my students are reading anyway. So that I know when they ask a dumb question in class, I know where it's coming from. I have resisted the temptation to edit Wikipedia, to put false facts in there, but I think that's a place our job has changed.
So Galit, when you were doing this new course at ISB, did you find it challenging to actually take on this new role, which was all your lectures are already online, and now you have application and discussion in the classroom. So you're not really sure what's going to happen in the classroom, which is sort of the uncertainty that many faculty are uncomfortable with, right? So how did you handle that?
Right. So for me, there was so much uncertainty because it was also the first time that I actually changed things. So I didn't even know what change I'm walking into, which can be very intimidating. But there are a few things. First of all, you do have some, I wouldn't call it control, but you do have your guiding hand is there. If you just curate stuff and put it on a website and say, go see, that's one thing. But if you're walking them through it and saying, watch this, and after that, I want you to respond to this discussion item online, you're already directing them in certain ways. So when they come to class, you already have an idea that hopefully half the class did this, or if you're like Arun, then probably all the class did this. So you have a starting point. And from there, of course, things can go in very, very unexpected directions. But that's really, I'm very biased because my classes are about, data analysis and business analytics and forecasting and statistics. So uncertainty is part of my life. So if you have a problem, it's always going to go in uncertain ways. And the content is how to deal with this uncertainty, how to go about it, what are the directions to take. So in fact, when you do this discussion in class and things are uncertain and going in different directions, it's much more similar to what would happen at their job or what would happen at a high corporate when they're dealing with these problems. So yes, it puts more burden on the faculty member, especially if you haven't worked in those conditions before, but you still know a lot more than your students. And I think that is the key. You have to be comfortable with the fact that you know a lot and they know a lot of other things that you don't know. And there's a lot of learning. You become a learner as a faculty member. You don't have to think of yourself as the teacher, but more of as, I know more about this, I'm going to guide them through this, I'm going to learn through this. And sometimes they come up with great ideas and you say, you know what, I never thought about this, let's take this further and see where this goes. So really it's an ego thing that you have to, sort of shed, but you still are the person driving the class.
So we are open to some questions from the audience. As if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask the panel. I see a couple of hands going up.
I'm Annie Steffi Sydney from Lila Institute of Technology and Science. My question is, you said about the new way of technology of teaching. So it is the individual learning will get both the managerial and technical skills from the way of teaching, and they will be equalized with the regular students, that is ordinary students without this advanced technologies.
Okay, Yula, that was not clear. Can you repeat that a little bit slowly? We're getting an echo here.
You told about the new way of technology of teaching. So for that, the individual will get both the managerial skills and technical skills, and they will be equalized with the normal students. Or they will be more than that. They will be more in their knowledge, or they will be equalized with the normal way of coaching from the institutions, normal way of teaching.
So if you're asking me if technology is going to help us produce a better, more effective manager, is that the question?
Yes.
I think so, right? So because one of the things we are emphasizing is that as you move away from a pure lecture to active learning, it is not active learning where the student is talking to the teacher. We are often getting the student to talk to the other student.
So you have to, make a point and defend your point of view, and that's how you make decisions, right? So you go into a company and you have to stand in front of in a boardroom or in front of a committee and actually drive, policies and things for the company. Therefore, you have to learn how to manage other people and be able to take tough decisions and defend yourself. So you're trying to mimic that in the classroom as opposed to passively listening to the teacher telling you something. So exactly what Gali talked about. She liked to bring the corporate environment as much as possible into the classroom, at the same time enabling learning to take place. Can you add to that? Can you get a mic, please?
Balasubramanian from Coimbatore. My question is academic leadership. Now, academic leadership, my understanding is it goes beyond the teaching learning process. And thank you very much for the wonderful insights which all of you provided. But is there anything beyond the classroom, beyond the teaching learning process in terms of academic leadership?
So again,
and how can technology help in that?
So I think at the core of academic leadership, so let's look back at some of the leaders that we would consider were, academic leaders in the business school. So one would argue that Harvard was a leader. How were they leaders? Because they produced, for example, this innovation of case writing and case teaching. Now, that is dealing with the classroom, teaching and learning. Once you have credibility, impacting teaching and learning, which is the core of what a business school does, then you have the ability to actually influence other aspects of, of running a MBA program or running a business school. So I don't think, so what we are talking about, I think what we're saying is that ultimately, if you can impact more effective teaching and learning, then you become a credible leader for you to do other things. So today, for example, we look at Harvard's endowment and managing finances as possibly, one good model for, financial security for a business school. But that may not have happened if they did not play a role in enabling, pedagogies in the classroom that is more effective. That is sort of one point of view that I have.
I think that, again, when you say academic leadership, it really depends who you're talking about, because you have the research part of it, and which we're keeping out of it right now. We're just talking about the teaching part of it. And I think that's a difficult two pieces to tear apart, because the reputation often comes from research if it's a research university. I also think that pulling this technology thing together and making it work is very difficult for a single university to do. And that's why Coursera and all these companies are coming up, because they have the capability to actually get this thing started. They started it up, basically, and made this very broad and are making it free for now, but who knows what's going to happen later on. I also think that at the individual faculty level, they're usually, like in any technology, they're the early adopters, the people who are after trying out something new and are on the bleeding edge. And after they can prove that it's working and it's great, then they'll grab a few other faculty on board, and you'll always have the reluctant people at the end. I think the academic leadership in this world is going to be a university or a school that is able to adopt something that works well and enforce everyone to do it. And it's usually nearly impossible to do that unless there's a very forward-looking type of leadership with a very open-minded type of faculty. But that's kind of right. The case methods, for example, at ISE, everybody does cases. And that's academic leadership, where the whole institution decides on a certain way that they believe is effective.
I'd just like to say one of the key things that we do, though, is as a school, is I raised the question, I sort of said, yeah, of course, we've been using a MOOC for our faculty and our PhD students for quite a long time. We belong to a consortium that delivers advanced research methods skills training through those technologies. Because it's very difficult to keep up to date on all of the most recent techniques that you might be able to use to publish in the best journals. So our research side of our mission completely supports using MOOCs as a development tool for faculty and for PhD students. So I think that's, yes, I think it's an important part not to forget that that's, again, that very specialized knowledge that's very difficult to translate to every school in the world. You don't need it at that level. You need it at the user level, not the teacher level.
Symbiosis Bangalore.
Speak a little louder.
Yeah. In a technology-driven module, teaching module such as the MOOCs, don't you think the pressure of learning shifts to the pressure of teaching, particularly when the faculty is subject to real-time online feedback and, is rather under a magnifying lens? Unless the faculty is very lucid and informed articulator, how would you really equip junior faculty to come across and perform well?
No, this is, I think you hit the nail on the head. This is actually a very challenging issue because the role of the faculty going forward is going to be very different. We've all sat in classes where, the teachers were simply lecturers. So that's a model that we're used to and we tend to mimic that. But what we are talking here is to do something very different. This is the notion of moving from a sage on the stage to a guide on the side. That requires new expertise. So one of the things we're doing in ISB is actually run workshops where we train faculty, and it's not easy. This is behavior change, right? On how do you manage an active learning environment in the classroom. It is actually more difficult than I ever imagined. So for example, Galit and I are possibly a couple of faculty who are driving this at ISB, but there are dozens of other faculty. It will take years. So one of the things we are doing right now is actually try to impact the PhD students who are going to become academics. So next week in ISB, we have a doctoral consortium on teaching where we will talk about the active learning so that when these PhD students, when they become academics next year, when they start planning their courses, they will start doing it with this in mind. That is the only way I think this is going to change. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very difficult.
Yeah, because you can't bullshit a student anymore now. Even as you're teaching, they are Googling the answers and challenging you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the role is no more that you are the repository of knowledge. You're not the expert. You've got to give up that mantle. And that's not easy. I think like what Galit said, it's sort of an ego issue that you are no more the expert. You are one among many experts and they have access to all of them. Therefore, what you do is to do some activities in the classroom which will enable deeper, longer-lasting learning, like, making decisions, looking at various issues around it, looking at caveats to a particular issue, and let them defend it peer-to-peer. And that makes them better decision makers, I think. I'm sorry,
I'd like to add one more point to Arun's thoughts. I think that, if you look 10 years down the line, the PhD students will already be taking courses like this, so they will see a model. But for now, I think, at least my experience has been that the best way to get new people on board is to co-teach with them. So last term when I started this crazy thing, I took a junior faculty with me and we co-taught. He sat through the first half of what I did, and then he took over. He plunged into it. It was his first course he ever taught, and did the other half. And as intimidating as it was, he saw what I was going through and we were building everything together. And this year, he's offering it in the same new structure. So co-teaching with someone who's done it before, you sit around, you look at what happened, and you slowly gain the idea. That's always been the case, right? From days when we learned how to do anything. We worked with someone who was the expert for a while.
I just think one of the most important parts of what you said was the students are Googling anyway. The students are using online resources anyway. Anyone who's in this room who does not think that they're going to have to change their teaching because of these courses, because of these resources, is not real. Hopefully they're just a couple years from retirement. Because for the rest of us, it will significantly affect. And when you look at leadership, it's, again, these are great tools that break down costs of time, distance, expertise. If you want to be an academic leader and don't want to use these tools, you're hurting your organization. You have to think about them.
Good morning to all the dignitaries on the dais. My name is Hiren Shah. I'm from V School. The question is, with evolving technologies and collaboration, do you see MOOCs or evolved forms of MOOC becoming the primary form of teaching in the business schools in the next 50 years, considering the fact that students of today become teachers of tomorrow?
Can you repeat? You want to know what the 50 years from now, how
would you see that the MOOCs or the evolved forms of MOOCs becoming the primary form of teaching in business schools in the next 50 years, including the fact that students of today become teachers of tomorrow?
Remember, the MOOC will never, so one of the points I think they're being made here is that the business school, the physical business school still provides added value dimensions like, for example, career placement, networking, all of this, right? For many of you, I'm sure you too, you go to a physical business school because of that ability. You're looking to be placed, you're going to have an alumni network that you're interacting with, all of that's going to be of value as your career progresses. So a MOOC can never replace that, right? But the MOOC can potentially play a role in the curriculum, so like what Darren was talking about, possibly it'll evolve, and I like that idea where you get multiple experts. So you got an economist in Stanford, an economist in Harvard, an economist in Kellogg, all giving their views about one particular concept that they all listen to before they come to class. And when they come to class, I as a teacher can now drive a discussion based on those three, short video clips that they saw. So that's going to be a richer learning experience for them, and therefore they're going to become, I think, better MBA students and therefore better graduates. And that's the way I see this. So the business school will always play a role because there are some unique elements that cannot be, replaced, I think.
I think one thing to keep in mind is about 100 years ago, Harvard Law School took the use of cases from Harvard Medical School. And a few years after that, Harvard Business School took the use of cases from Harvard Law School. 100 years later, in most schools around the world, we're talking about using cases as an innovation. Faculties of Education took action learning into the schools about 60 years ago. And in business schools, again, we're talking about that as an innovation today. I don't think we should overestimate the ability of business school professors to resist change. And 50 years may not be long enough to see the level of change that you're thinking about. Part of me thinks, yes, it will, and may disrupt the industry quite a bit. But history shows we are a stubborn bunch that changes very, very slowly.
On a somewhat related note to your question, I think that what will actually, I hope that this is something that will change, is that even when you're in a business school, there's a limited number of courses that you can take in a certain amount of time. So you're not going to be taking lots of courses, right? You take enough courses to graduate. But many times when you're outside, you actually need to solve problems with new tools, or you have to think about problems in different ways. And these, whether it's MOOCs or whatever we're going to call them at that point, you'll be able to expand beyond what you can do just on your own, and it will also give you directions, and people will go back to school and say, oh, you know what, we just saw a MOOC on marketing, and we actually need that particular topic. So I think there are going to be additional new ways for people to continue their education. And of course, again, completely unrelated, I think that the biggest audience that is benefiting from MOOCs today, and when I'm saying benefit, I'm not talking about money, is the older folks. I know that, for instance, my mother-in-law, many people who are very active but are no longer at the age where they attend schools or business schools or universities, they want to continue learning new ideas. So they can pick up textbooks or books, but there's so many, you don't know where to start. These MOOCs are really helpful for people who are in their second or third parts of life, and these people might actually be contributing back once they gain that knowledge, and I think that's going to be an interesting way of how to bring them back into this whole loop.
Yeah, so the whole notion of lifelong learning, MOOCs are going to play a big role in that. Any other questions? We're running short of time. Maybe the last question.
Good morning, sir. I'm Amrish Chandra Naik from Regional College of Management, Autonomous Bhubaneswar. Sir, in fact, yesterday we had a session where we discussed the management education from APICS, And today we are thinking of the application of the technology in management education. So in specific, I do refer to Indian culture where every time we do focus on the kind of relationship these teachers do have with their disciples. We do talk of Guru Shishya relationship. Of course, in modern form, we do talk of this mentor and mentee relationships. Now, don't you think that as we move ahead of application of technology in management education, the teachers, they are gradually losing the direct impact they do have on students? Or isn't it that with the application of this technology, the student-teacher relationship is hampered a lot out of that?
So, I think great question. I wouldn't say that they are losing their impact. Their role is very different. So, in the past, like I said, you go to the guru, right, because he is the repository of knowledge. No more is that going to be valid. But this notion of being a mentor and mentee, that is still going to be true. So, for example, if through technology, I've got variety of views on a particular, let's say, economic issue from the top thinkers of the world, I still need some guidance on how to make sense of it, right? So this mentor-mentee, so therefore the role is very different. The impact is still going to be the same, or I would argue it's going to be even more. But the role is different. That's sort of my view of it.
And I think that, evidence-based answer. Students who've taken my class in this new role are still calling me up for consulting. So they still value that you have a lot to offer, even when you're not the person who's just kind of throwing at them the knowledge. So definitely the students see the value as well. But you need to know how to do it.
I think also sort of a point that I made yesterday was this is how students use technology. Galit was talking about Facebook. Students use technology now all of the time. If we make them interact with us ways that are not normal or not regular, they'll interact with us less. While sometimes it might seem strange to me that people have long conversations through technology rather than face-to-face, my daughter, who's 19 years old, finds it totally normal. So I think we need to make sure that we're having conversations with people we care about in ways they care about.
I think we have one last question.
Hello. Sir, my name is Amit Kumar. I am from Master School of Management, Meerut. Sir, in ancient time, the teaching method was Gurukul. The people who had to stay there. Okay. Then after it came to classroom teaching. Now we are talking about technology. Those who are good students, they can learn by any way. But when we talk about average, then the way of learning in the classroom, and when we talk about technology which will be provided to them, in the classroom there was somebody who can take care of them. And when you talk about technology, it will be provided. Also, most of the time you can see, and what I understand that when the technology is provided, if somebody is not caring about it, then they will spend their time on doing such activity which is not important. So, what will or who will take care of it by which they can focus on the right thing what they have to do? Actually, there was a session yesterday in which we talked about MOOC. Yeah, that was it. So, we talked about MOOC, and that was all about technology, the learning by technology. So, the way by which a good student can learn, it doesn't depend on technology or classroom teaching. They are good and they will do all the things what the facility provided. So, technology is nothing more than facilitator. But when we talk about average student, then how the teacher will just take care of it? Can you just give insight on this, please?
Again, if I understood your question, like I said, the role of the teacher, so the teacher is simply using technology to facilitate more impactful learning. Remember, in the past, listening used to be equated to learning, simply listening. And telling is to be equated to teaching. Simply telling meant teaching. And we are saying those are very weak forms of teaching and learning. Now, the moment you bring technology in the classroom, it opens up a whole host of issues. So one of the things, for example, that we face is that if I allow using, computers and tablets in the classroom, and I'm also using the internet, how do I stop my students from doing other things, right? Going to Facebook and Gmail and so on. So one of the conditions that our faculty had for bringing technology in the classroom is that if I have a device, it has got to lock the student into that application that I'm working on. So, for example, we do a lot of interactive things that the students can interact with each other and with the faculty member, but they cannot leave that application even though they're using their own laptop, because it locks them into and get out to Facebook or Gmail, because I want them focused on what I want to do. So you have to find ways. So technology can be a solution. It also creates problems, but use other technology to solve that problem. So it is, again, we are all learning as we are doing these things, because we don't know how best to optimally manage all this. But I guess the bottom line that we are all saying is that the role of the teacher, thanks to technology, is changing. And if it's changing, the teachers better, join this revolution, if you will, in terms of the role they play in the classroom, or they're going to be left behind. And students like you, I'm sure, are going to gain more from teachers who are actually doing this form of active learning rather than simply lecturing. That's been, the mode of teaching for a very long time.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I just wanted to add one point for the educators, for the teachers on the side of the panel here. I think that by creating some people will just collect material, but just so that you realize that when you have something that you really are very good at, and you can create either videos or some materials that other people will be pulling into their MOOCs, you're contributing a lot. And that is going to stay there forever. It's like writing a good textbook. So I think thinking in the visual way, or thinking about simulations, or it can be anything that can be shared and scaled and used up front, there is a lot of satisfaction from the teacher's, instructor's point of view, and it's definitely worth stepping into it just to try it out.
All right, so thank you very much. Thanks to my panel, Dalit and Darren, and you've been a great audience. Thank you very much.